Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. And on this 21st straight day of Seahawks coverage on Hawk Blogger Mornings, we have one of our oldest, not by age, but oldest in terms of time with show guests making a triumphant return. Danny Kelly of The Ringer.
Woohoo!
Danny, man, it has been a minute.
I know.
How's life?
It's going well. It's going well. I'm thinking back. I think we started doing shows back in 2011 or something like that. It's pretty crazy how long it's been. But yeah, thank you for having me on. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it is. I actually, speaking of throwbacks, I was just on with Mina Kimes yesterday.
Nice.
And I almost tortured her with you, her, and I doing a 2017 prediction show for the Seahawks, where we were talking about Reese Odiombo, and I predicted that Marshawn Lynch was going to have a career year rushing for the Oakland Raiders. It was definitely a trip down memory lane.
Wow. Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
A lot of weird stuff has happened over the last, 13 years, 14 years. But obviously now brand new era that we can talk about. So that's fun.
Yeah. We'll get into that in just a moment. I mean, for folks that don't know your path, your journey, you started out, at least with Seahawks related stuff, doing field goals and managing that. And from my money, just absolutely killed it at field goals, brought on some of the best talent that continues to produce great Seahawks coverage. And you've gone on to do a bunch of additional things. What's your latest that's going on with you and The Ringer? Like what's your responsibilities? What are you covering?
Yeah. My career's kind of taken a weird winding path. Obviously, like you said, I started out doing the Seahawks stuff at field goals. I kind of started doing more NFL general stuff and NFL draft stuff while at SB Nation. Transferred over to The Ringer here, and I covered the NFL generally speaking for a couple of years there, and then sort of have evolved into doing fantasy football and NFL draft stuff. So that's like my main responsibilities now is during the NFL season, doing fantasy football, and we do the Ringer Fantasy Football Show, do a bunch of fantasy content for The Ringer, and then during sort of starting in December, January, transfer over to doing draft stuff. So that's kind of the two main areas. I still cover the NFL generally speaking sometimes, but my main sort of purview is fantasy and the draft.
Well, I mean, this was a pretty momentous draft for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
A lot of crazy things, a lot of like pretty big name players, highly anticipated players. What was your general take on the draft? What were the storylines that kind of caught your eye in this year's draft, this past draft?
Well, obviously the quarterbacks, coming into the league have potential to really make a huge impact. Like if Caleb Williams, Jade Daniels, I really like Drake Maye. Like if all those guys can kind of live up to some of their reputations, then the NFL is going to be in really good place when it comes to quarterbacking. And that's obviously huge because overall offense has been down the last few years. And so we kind of, obviously from a fantasy point of view, it'd be nice to have some quarterbacks that will power high-powered offenses, high-scoring offenses. So I think that was obviously the big storyline. Some very good receivers as well, which of course is fun for fantasy. But yeah, I think from a big picture, just like if these quarterbacks pan out, if one or two of these quarterbacks pan out, that'll be what this draft is remembered for, probably.
You mentioned Drake Maye, and there's some light news about Drake Maye and I think Jared Mayo opening the door that he may start. But still the odds-on favorite is Jacoby Brissett. This is a particular interest to the Seahawks fans because they start out home against Denver, very likely facing Bo Nix, and then week 2 they travel to New England and may well face a second straight rookie quarterback.
Yeah.
What's your guess? Do you think Drake Maye starts the year? Do you think the Seahawks face Drake Maye in that second week as a Patriots starter? And 2, since you said you like Drake Maye, what do you think he could accomplish if they decided to stick him in there behind what's a pretty sorry offensive line?
Right. Man, I don't know. I think my official prediction is he'll start somewhere around week 4. I think I still think there's a strong chance he will start week 1. But I mean, from the Patriots point of view, they probably don't need to. They probably won't feel that they have to do that because, they have a veteran guy in Jacoby. They're, I guess you could say, in a transitional season. I think their defense gives them an opportunity. They're going to have a strong defense. Their defense will give them an opportunity to be competitive. But obviously, in a good division, Jets, Dolphins, Bills, sort of in a transitional year, I think they probably won't super rush to get Drake Maye out there. So I would say the odds are he probably won't start against the Seahawks there in week 2. And, I don't know if you think that's good or bad for the Seahawks. I think it's probably not. I mean, anytime a rookie quarterback is starting, it's like an advantage for a defense. So it's probably ultimately slightly bad for the Seahawks if he doesn't start week 2. But the rest of the season going forward and looking forward at his career, I really like his upside. I think in year 1, they're probably going to implement like a really balanced thing, try and run the ball a lot, try and protect him because he's, on the spectrum of like rookie quarterbacks, he still has, mechanical things to sort out. There's a rawness there. I think that they're going to be cognizant of and try and like bring him along slowly. So, but overall, he's big, huge arm. He's I think a very smart, cerebral quarterback who can read the defense and make changes at the line of scrimmage. Like there's a lot of things to really, really like about him going forward in his career. But, early on, I would guess they just treat him, like a game manager and try and really make everything around him as easy as possible, which is going to be a hard ask because they have young receivers. They have very inexperienced receivers. And like you said, the offensive line is still, a huge question mark. So, yeah, again, my guess is it'll be Brissett, but from what I've heard, they really, really like him. Like, the team from sources in the team or whatever, they really, really like him. And, so they're excited about his future. I just don't know what that means realistically when he's going to start.
Yeah, Danny, when I think about all the conversation going around, wow, like these great situations that some rookie quarterbacks landed in, like Caleb Williams in Chicago. And then you talk about even, McCarthy in Minnesota. Am I did I get the name right? JJ, whatever. I don't know.
Yep.
Sorry.
Not a great sign for his future.
Yeah, I'm not a fan, but I clearly have just wiped him out of my head. But what they've got surrounding him in Minnesota,
mm-hmm.
I think he's going to need it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at Drake Maye, and you're like, oh boy. I mean, the receiver crew is awful. The offensive line, I think, is pretty close to awful. I don't know that it's in his interest to play almost at all this season.
Right.
Like, let Jacoby Brissett take all the bullets for a bad offense.
I know. It's one of those things where I think there's two philosophies on this. It's like you learn from playing, you learn from experience, you learn from being in there and kind of like making mistakes and everything. But then you also have to be careful about ruining someone's psyche or ruining their confidence and turning the fan base against them, which I think is like the big worry with young quarterbacks is like the fan base is like, okay, this guy sucks, and then that can like really hurt their confidence and just like overall stability of the team. So yeah, it's a fine line. You have to walk that fine line between getting your guy experience and throwing him out there too early. So yeah, I don't know what they'll do. I like the foundation they have, but at receiver, like I really like Jalen Polk. I was a fan of Javon Baker, who they got, I think, in the 4th round. Like there's some guys there, but again, it's going to take a while. These guys are all very young. Demario Douglas has some potential too. Kendrick Bourne, if he can get healthy, is like a good, reliable veteran type player. But yeah, overall, I'd say this is one of the worst skill position groups in the NFL. So that's not great. And obviously, it's not what you want for a young, somewhat raw looking quarterback, or at least inexperienced guy like him. And so I will say the one advantage they have is a good defense. So it's not like he's going to have to come in and probably play in a bunch of shootouts. That's like the one advantage you have. But yeah, the offensive system around him is a work in progress for sure.
Yeah, one of the things that's wild to me, and we won't spend the whole show talking about the Patriots, of course, but I thought it was absolutely inexcusable for the Patriots to make that pick and not trade out for what would have been a ransom. And the reason that was generally given is that Robert Kraft, aging, wants to compete right now, wants to get the quarterback. And I'm sitting there thinking, dude, you are years away from having a viable roster, and you could absolutely accelerate that by getting this bounty. And then for them to pick the quarterback and potentially still have to sit him or ruin him by doing that, it's just, to me, I would be, if I was a Patriots fan, granted, I'd have more rings than I have fingers probably, but so whatever. But I thought that was a really, really questionable decision they made from a team building standpoint. I'm curious if as a Drake Maye fan, what do you think?
I went back and forth about it the whole preseason or prior to the draft. I mean, and I was, I was on your side in terms of like, they probably should just wait. It'd be in their best interest to trade out of that spot and get a bunch of first rounders. But ultimately, like I kind of land on, it's just hard to get a quarterback. It's really, really hard to get a good quarterback. And especially, at the number 3 spot, the fact that Drake fell to them. I had Drake ranked higher than Jaden Daniels. And so, he's sitting there at number 3, and you have this opportunity to draft a, 6'5", 230-pound gunslinger with like a really smart football mind. Like to me, it's like really hard to pass that up, regardless of where you are in team building. And I would say, like, sometimes the team building, the roster building process goes faster than you think. Sometimes it's very hard, of course, and sometimes it takes forever. But like if they traded for Brandon Aiyuk or whatever, how much further ahead would that put them in the process? Stuff like that where you can't really predict exactly how everything is going to go. Maybe some of these guys, like maybe Jalen Polk is like a Puka Nacua type of player. You never know. And so from the Patriots point of view, I'm like, if I was sitting in their shoes, I probably would have taken Drake Maye too, just because I'm like, it's going to be really hard to find a quarterback like this going forward, even with multiple first round picks. And so I kind of landed on the Patriots side on that, but I had my doubts in the pre-draft process as well. I was like, I just don't know what to do with this team.
Well, I wouldn't want to be a disrespectful host and argue with you too vehemently, but Danny, that's actually an awful take. No, I'm just kidding. I get it. I get
we'll
it.
See. Yeah.
We will see. We will see. I mean, if you've been watching Hard Knocks at all, like the Giants were practically begging for, if you ever think about trading that pick, just let us know. Give us a call. I mean, they could have been sitting there at 6, and they could have milked the Giants for a bunch. And what a difference it would make right now if the Giants had Drake Maye, and the Patriots had Michael Penix or had, Malik Neighbors or however that would have fallen. Those are the things that, like all these ripple effects in the NFL. You mentioned Brandon Aiyuk, and before we get into some of the Seahawks related pieces, this is a pretty important one for the Seahawks. I know you've been writing about this and podcasting about this with Brandon Aiyuk. First of all, do you believe Brandon Aiyuk is going to get moved?
Not really. I kind of think I think this is like the old cliche, but it's like deadlines for action. Like I think they'll figure something. They'll get something done when there is actually a deadline. It's so hard. It's hard to picture them moving on from a guy who they drafted, has developed into one of the most talented route runners in the NFL, big play receiver for them. Obviously, they have guys that are aging at other skill groups, like George Kittle's not getting any younger. Deebo Samuel, especially for the way he plays, is getting up there in age. To me, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to move him. Plus, like you just look at the context of the situation, they could win a Super Bowl this year. They have a team that I'm sure, think is a Super Bowl contender. So why would you get rid of Brandon Aiyuk right in the middle of that? So he's going to be pissed, but I don't think they're going to move him, to be honest. But, you never know if like maybe the well is poisoned and they ultimately have to. But my guess right now is they won't trade him. They'll sign him to a deal.
So you do think that they will sign him to a deal ultimately?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's in their best interest to do it.
Yeah, I actually do as well. Even though I'd rather the well be poisoned.
Right.
Do you think that? Have you looked into what the ripple effects might be if they sign him to a deal of the level that he's asking for?
I mean, obviously that will complicate things with Deebo Samuel. I think they would have to move him at that point. Maybe not this year, but eventually it's going to, of course, affect what they do with Brock Purdy, because he's going to be asking for a huge deal at some point here down the line. And so it's always a question of like, can they keep the band together long enough to like win a Super Bowl and have this window? But yeah, I mean that is a huge question. But this is like the blueprint. I feel like you have a really cheap quarterback. Brock Purdy's making like incredibly low amount of money, like less than $1 million or whatever. Like there's, probably everyone in the NBA is making more than Brock Purdy at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is their window. You have to take advantage of that. And sign your superstar players that are going to give him support around him. So, obviously there is, of course, ripple effects with who they can re-sign down the line and who they can hold on to. But, I think that's the proposition you always have to face. And right now they are a Super Bowl team. They should do that and try and win a Super Bowl.
If they do end up having to move him, which seems like the less likely outcome based on what most people believe, which rookie quarterback do you think would most benefit from his addition? There's been conversations about the Broncos being interested. There's conversation the Patriots have offered a second, which I got to say that feels really cheap. Like, right?
Yeah,
like,
come on.
I'd expect at least an AJ Brown kind of package for Aiyuk, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously you've got Jaden Daniels, who's maybe the odds-on favorite. And the Steelers, not a rookie quarterback, but we'll save them for another part. But which of those teams do you think would be the best fit for him? Where do you think he would put up the biggest numbers?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the best fit for him and like the best situation that would help the quarterback is New England, like you said, just because they don't have a number one receiver there. I think if they drop him into that offense, then you're starting to look at it a little bit differently in terms of like how ready they are to compete, because then you have a true number one, you have a really good running back in Ramondre Stevenson, and then you have a bunch of other, depth and role player type guys that could come in and sort of like do their job. Hunter Henry's still around, so they've got some guys there. And so that would be my pick in terms of like biggest impact for the quarterback. But obviously in terms of numbers, I might put him in Washington if I want big numbers, because he's got that built-in connection with Jaden Daniels. It's one of the wilder things I think, like in terms of like the draft window, is like he played with Jaden Daniels at Arizona State way back when. And so I probably would put him with the Commanders just based on like the type of offense you expect them to run, the built-in chemistry that they have. I think he wants to go there. I think that they'll probably pass the ball quite a bit with Jaden Daniels. And so I would probably put him with Jaden as, his best situation if you're talking about like fantasy and like big numbers.
All right, I've got to take this in a totally different direction. Then I want to return to the draft in a minute. Is it correct that you recruited Evan Hill to be part of Field Gulls back in the day? Am I remembering that right?
I don't know what the right way to answer that is. I'd have to go back through my emails. I can't recall would be like, I think what my lawyer would tell me.
Yeah, because I'm just trying to figure out if you're to blame for what's become of Evan Hill.
Maybe I was a really bad influence on him. Yeah. I remember having a lot of discussions about like salary cap stuff with him back in the day. But I don't think I ruined him. I would say, if anything, I made him the man he is today. No, I'm just kidding. No.
Well, we're gonna clip that and make sure that anytime Evan tweets,
which is a great guy for the record. Yeah,
he's a great guy.
He's by the way, he comes up with his own takes. I had nothing to do with that. I mean, when you're a hot take artist like him, it's just that kind of thing comes naturally. You can't teach that, really.
It is true. It is true. And you can't control it either, as much as sometimes I wish it was possible to.
I mean, the food takes,
yes.
that's not something you can teach at all. Yeah.
Thank God for those, right? I mean, when Seahawks Twitter was at its worst, Evan's food takes, I felt like united us all.
Something we can all agree on. Yeah.
Exactly. That Evan's wrong. I mean, generally is the agreement. So back to the draft for a second, knowing that that's an area of focus for you. What was your reaction to Byron Murphy coming to the Seahawks in the first round? And what was your what did you hear around the league about Byron Murphy as a player and going to the Seahawks?
Yeah, I mean, the big rumor, I guess, like as the draft was ramping up, the day before, was that he was not getting out of the top 10. Byron Murphy was not going to get out of the top 10. Like there was a lot of smoke around that. I think what happened ultimately was the Bears had him in their crosshairs, like they really wanted him, but then Rome Odunze fell to them, and they were just like, okay, well, we got to take Rome. And so just the way the draft kind of felt, because of course I don't think anyone expected Penix to go 8th overall or whatever it was, 7th overall, 8th overall to the Falcons. And so, I think just the way the draft fell changed things. But yeah, that was the indication was, this is a top 10 player, the unquestioned number one defensive tackle in the draft, if not the best defensive player in the draft. And so I was really pumped when he got to the Seahawks at 16. And I'm blanking on the numbers. It might have been 15, whatever it was.
16. You got it.
And so I was very excited. Like, you're sitting there, it's like 12, 13. There's no defensive players off the board. You're like, holy crap. Like, we could get a really, really good defensive player here. There's a lot of really exciting guys still on the board. And so ultimately when he got picked, I was very excited. I think, I compared him to Justin Madubuike before the draft. So it was like kind of perfect that he slots into like that kind of role, I think, for this new defense with Mike McDonald and just kind of like what he could bring. I think he's really versatile. He can play multiple spots on the front. I think that's, from what I understand, how this defense is going to look. It's going to be, guys dropping back when you don't expect them to. He's very athletic. He can move in space. There was times that he was lining up on the edge, not often, but he did a couple times. So this is a very versatile, explosive, powerful, 3-down run defender. He can play the run as well as rush the passer. And so, I think this is the type of player he needs. You could question, I guess, the value of taking a defensive tackle early on, but with the way that these contracts are going, I don't think it's not the same as it used to be, perhaps, and where you look at that as a non-premium position. These guys are getting paid like premium players. So, and give me a guy who can collapse the pocket and make it hard on a quarterback, and I'm fine with that.
What do you think? What do you think the reason is that Byron Murphy is well down the list of Defensive Rookie of the Year candidates in terms of who's coming out? He's below guys drafted in the 3rd round.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, like he's well down the list in a lot of these cases. Any thoughts about why that might be?
I think generally speaking, this isn't specific to like this season only. It's like defensive player of the year, rookie defensive player of the year is like a stats position. You know what I mean? Like if you can rack up stats, that's like a really good way to do it. So generally speaking, I think like edge players get a big bonus on that because they're racking up more pressures, more sacks. Usually than interior players. You got like linebackers a lot of times will rack up tackles and if you get like a corner that has a bunch of picks, like he's going to be a favorite automatically. So I'd say just generally speaking, positional value or a positional, just like the how people look at those positions is probably a big reason why. Like I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting a good amount of sacks, but like odds are he's not going to have double-digit sacks as a rookie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would point to that as being the big reason why. I also think generally speaking, the Seahawks are kind of overlooked right now. Like they are a team that people, I was looking at FanDuel the other day. They have the same win total over under as the Cardinals, which I think is absurd. And so maybe people are just overlooking the Seahawks. There's a regime change here. People don't really know what to expect. The Seahawks defense has been bad for years. And so, on one hand, I kind of get it, but at the same time, I think McDonald coming in here, and installing his scheme with I think a pretty talented group of players that just need to like come together and coalesce. Like, I think they could be a lot better than people are expecting.
Yeah, that was a couple other questions before I let you go here. Given that you do cover the whole league and you talk to folks across the league, what do you think are maybe some misperceptions about the Seahawks nationally?
Geno is the big one. I think there's a huge disconnect and a huge disagreement. It's like a Rorschach test. Like some people look at Geno and he's just like the guy that flamed out, was a big draft disappointment. He throws too many picks. He forces the ball. And then you have other people who are like, look, he's aggressive. He's fearless. He's willing to attack coverage. He can read the defense. He's really, really strong. If you look at any of the advanced numbers, like he's really good. His pressure to sack rate is really good. He gets rid of the football. There are some picks that you'd like to have back, but overall, and this is where I stand. I think he's a really good quarterback that has like people just have a hard time kind of like forgetting the earlier part of his career. If you looked at Geno's numbers and Geno's performance the last 2 years in a vacuum, like people would be talking about him as a well above average quarterback. But I think a lot of people that think he's going to get benched this year for Sam Howell. Like there's a massive like discrepancy on like how people view Geno. I think that of course is a huge reason why people aren't super confident in the Seahawks. There's a regime change too. It's like there's so many questions. We don't know what we're going to get from the offense. You don't know what you're going to get from the defense. It's a good division. So, from that point of view, I kind of get it. But like at the same time, I just think people are underestimating Geno. I think people are underestimating the improvement you can see on defense. So I'm bullish on the Seahawks. But I think that's kind of where the big disconnect is. Like people just don't believe in Geno.
Where would you put the over under if you were setting for wins?
Well, I think I'd pick them to win like 9 games, so 8.5. It's 7.5. So I guess like everything I just said is a little bit like I should probably calm down a little bit because it's not that big of a difference.
It's a pretty bad number. It's a pretty bad. I had the same reaction, but go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would put it at 8.5, which would put them, in terms of over under numbers, that's like a pretty big difference, I guess. Like it would put them closer to some of the competing teams for like potentially the playoffs and things like that. I know that the FTN Almanac, which used to be the Football Outsiders Almanac, has Seattle at their projection has Seattle at 8.9. And that's right in line with Philadelphia. The Rams are at 9, Cleveland at 9.2. Like these are some good teams. And so obviously they, their projections have a pretty positive look at the Seahawks. And I'm kind of in line with that. So I've been saying 9 wins. Of course, anything can happen. Injuries are dramatic, in terms of like what they can affect the season going. But like I see this as a team that can compete to play in the playoffs.
You do a lot of fantasy stuff, Danny, over for the Ringer. Danny Kelly from the Ringer with us for a few more minutes. How do you look at the Ryan Grubb offense?
Yeah.
And try to predict which players are going to benefit from him from a fantasy perspective and which players may not?
Obviously massive projection anytime you have a college quarterback or college offensive coordinator going into the NFL. But, just talking to people about that offense, they were running a lot of pro style routes. It wasn't like just like like the term people use these days is like a Mickey Mouse offense. It wasn't just like, hey, go run downfield, we'll toss it up to you. It's like they had real route concepts that were working together to get guys open. Michael Penix, who I liked, I think more than the consensus, was really good at deciphering exactly where he needed to go with the ball very quickly. Like he didn't take hardly any sacks all year. There was a lot to like in terms of like his processing. I think Geno has that skill as well. And so I think there's a lot of potential. I think if you're being rational, you probably say it might take a minute for everything to kind of come together. And so, I don't think this is going to be like one of the best offenses in the NFL, but I think they will be efficient. I'm very excited with what Jackson Smith and Jigba can be in this offense as a slot receiver. Obviously, good route runner, really good hands, really savvy at getting open and kind of making a little bit after the catch. And so I think he has the potential to be much more heavily utilized than he was last year. I hope anyway, because I think he has the talent to be that sort of like middle of the field guy. Generally speaking, I think this offense is like a lot of easy button stuff where you're getting the ball out quickly, screens, dump offs, things like that, where they have, guys stacked at the line of scrimmage, get them off the line of scrimmage, make it easier on the quarterback, make it easier on the receivers by using scheme, motion, things like that, to get them open. I think, and then you pair that with like an aggressive vertical game. So a lot of easy button stuff, and then attack when you see an opening down the field. I think DK Metcalf, can play that role as like a big play guy. And then I think Jackson Smith underneath is going to be, a pretty high volume receiver. And then see where Tyler Lockett kind of falls in the middle there. I don't think he'll be the leading receiver this year again, as he was last year. I think he was last year, in terms of just like total
leading in targets for sure.
Yeah. I think he'll be a little bit more of a role player, but like kind of like what Jalen Polk was last year for the Huskies. But if you look at like when McMillan, Polk, and Odunze were all healthy, it was kind of like Odunze was the number one guy, McMillan was a high volume guy in the middle, and then Polk was just like a good player, a good tough, physical, strong at the catch point, like role player more or less. Not that that's a bad thing, but like that was kind of how everything sort of worked out when everybody was healthy. And so that's kind of how I can envision it. And then I think they're going to run the ball a lot too. So excited to see what happens with the run game. I have no idea whether they like Kenneth Walker or Zach Charbonnet more. I'm a big Kenneth Walker truther, so I would assume he's going to be the number one guy. But of course, Charbonnet has talent too, so they'll get him involved. But big picture, it's hard to predict what the Seahawks are going to do on offense because there's no telling what this offense is really going to look like. Again, people kind of hate Geno, so I think people are a little bit low on the Seahawks, but I would be willing to kind of I'm excited to see what DK Metcalf can do, of course, and then JSN I could be a good value.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is it fair to think that most people are probably going to reduce value or reduce their predictions for Seahawks players, and so that if the Seahawks offense, if you're bullish on Ryan Grubb, there could be some good value picks on the Seahawks offense?
Absolutely. I think down the line, everybody on the Seahawks offense is undervalued because, or at least has the potential to be good value down the line, depending on how it all shakes out. People are pretty down on DK Metcalf. People don't know what to think with this run game. So Kenneth Walker, despite being, in my mind, one of the best pure runners in the NFL, has been pretty dramatically devalued in fantasy. People are pretty excited about what Zach Charbonnet can do. And then people have no idea what to expect from JSN. His rookie season was really disappointing from a fantasy point of view. And so, I think everybody, again, this goes back to what we were talking about, just the expectations are pretty low with the Seahawks right now. I think you can find value with all those guys.
All right. Can I sneak in one more question before I let you go?
For sure.
All right. Everyone always talks about the 49ers. I get it. We talk about them too. But the Rams really kind of stepped ahead of the Seahawks last year and have done a really masterful job in remaking that roster really quickly. I'm curious, Danny, what do you think would have to happen for the Seahawks to overtake the Rams this year?
Well, defensively, they have to make a big jump. The Ram, if you look at it, and this is maybe one of the reasons Pete Carroll ultimately did get fired, is if you look at what the Rams have done with some of their mid and late round picks on defense, just fitting guys in, finding guys that can play specific roles. Everybody's buying in, everybody's playing together. Their defense was made up of stars and scrubs, essentially. There's guys on the defense, I don't know their names. Just frankly, there's just a bunch of random dudes. Last year they came in with they had 30 undrafted guys on their roster to start the season, and their defense was better than the Seahawks defense. Obviously they had the benefit of having Aaron Donald up front, of course. And they're not going to have that this year, but, or at least hopefully. Just don't let him come back. But I think ultimately, the reason, if I'm Jody Allen, I'm looking at what the Rams are doing on defense and with what they've spent on defense and the picks they've used, I'm why can't we get that out of our defensive head coach? I think that's a part of a big reason that Pete Carroll got fired is look, we've sunk a lot of resources into this defense and it's just going in the wrong direction every year. And so I would say that was a huge strength, of course, with the Rams last year, and then finding Puka Nacua, who turned out to be one of the best receivers in the league last year. Stroke of genius, I guess. It's funny because if you look at he was picked in the 5th round, I believe. They picked Davis Allen, the tight end, a couple picks before Puka Nacua. So it's this is one of those situations where it's even the Rams had no freaking clue that it's going to be Puka Nacua year. Obviously they liked him, but he just outplayed his projection by a million. And of course, it helped that he had a quarterback that completely trusted him in Matt Stafford. That connection is off the charts good. And so, I think it's just, if you look at the Rams, they've made incredible value out of their mid and late round picks. And that's something the Seahawks haven't really done as much lately. And so I think, long story short, the best way to get ahead of the Rams is to start having some of these role players actually become really important, really good players, find some value in those later round picks. Obviously you want to see your highly drafted players play well, but I think the reason I'm most excited about Mike Macdonald is if you look at the Ravens defense last year, it wasn't a bunch of huge name guys that were coming in and playing well for him. It's Geno Stone is leading the NFL in interceptions. The way this scheme helped guys develop and get the best out of these guys is what I'm most excited about with Mike Macdonald. So I think if the Seahawks defense can improve dramatically, that puts them ahead of that's what they can do to get ahead of the Rams. And I think the offense is going to be solid. Like, I don't have many worries about the offense. But if the defense in particular can make a jump, that would be huge for the Seahawks. And that's what the Rams have done.
Amazing. Danny Kelly from The Ringer. Danny, what is up there for people to read of yours right now? What's coming up from
you can check out our fantasy football guide at fantasyfootball.theringer.com. We got our rankings up there. We're going to be doing a huge update in the next couple of days with a bunch of profiles and new rankings and draft tracker and everything you need for your fantasy drafts. And then check us out on the Ringer Fantasy Football Show, which we are doing 2 times a week. We start 3 times a week next week.
Amazing. Danny Kelly of The Ringer, friend of show. Thank you so much for taking some time this morning.
Yeah, man.
You're the best, man. Have a great season.
Appreciate you, dude.
Take care.
Yeah.
All right. Take care. That was Danny Kelly of The Ringer. I think one of the best out there. And he really did assemble some fantastic talent over there at Field Gulls back in the day. I don't think anyone's done it like him. And I don't mean that as shade to other people. I mean that mainly as just recognition for what Danny brought. I think he was a singular entity. Danny and I met back then when kind of Hawk blogger stuff was just starting to come online. Been probably 3 or 4 years. And, you know, people always thought that, you know, the bloggers would be in competition with each other, but that's not how Danny and I saw it. You know, I had tons of respect for the work that he did, and I think the feeling was mutual. And just a lot of really cool folks that I've met through this experience. But, you know, it's interesting that last question, you know, talking with Danny about the Rams. I think so much time is spent by me, by others, on the 49ers and on whether the Seahawks are closing the gap with the 49ers. I think really the much more interesting question to start focusing on is the Rams, because here's why. I think the 49ers are going this way. I think they are declining. And I think that they are going to have a hard time avoiding the gravity that is the NFL in terms of salary cap, in terms of aging. We know about Trent Williams' age, which I think is a huge one. George Kittle's age. They're going to have to pay Brock Purdy. They're going to lose either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Aiyuk. You know, Dre Greenlaw's coming off an injury. That defensive line already. Like, there's a lot of things about that 49er team that, from my point of view, they're coming back to the pack. And in a couple of years, I don't know that they are going to be a top 3, top 5 contender in the NFC. The Rams are going like this. Now, there is a caveat with that with the Rams. They also have a ticking clock relative to one of the guys that makes them go, which is Matthew Stafford, who's 36 years old. He's not going to play forever, but could he play like potentially 3 more years? I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's crazy. He's been one of the toughest quarterbacks in the NFL. He plays through injuries. He had, for my money, the best season I've seen from him last year. Like, given what he had to work with and how he played, I think people really still underestimate how good he was last year. From a pure passing perspective, I think you could make a pretty good case he was the best passing quarterback in the NFL last year during the regular season. Patrick Mahomes, playoff-wise, clutch, amazing. During the regular season, Patrick Mahomes had one of his worst seasons with one of his worst supporting casts, okay? Josh Allen had a great season, but if I think maybe if you just limit to passing and you take away the legs, I might take what Matt Stafford did over Josh Allen. You can kind of go on down the list, but point being, Matt Stafford is the straw that stirs that drink for the Rams, and there is some expiration date on that. They just lost Aaron Donald. So this is a critical year where a lot of people are just assuming the Rams are going to have trouble on defense after having to replace Aaron Donald. I'm not so sure. I really like what they've done on the defensive line. I think they've got the second best linebacker in the NFC West in Ernest Jones behind. Interestingly, they haven't extended him yet. So we'll see what happens with that. And then they've got some really interesting guys with Cam Curl, Cam Kitchens in the back, Quentin Lake making the transition to a nickel back. I think that I obviously am a huge fan of Jared Verse. They've got Kobe Turner. They got Byron Young. I just have this, and Bobby Brown's another guy that I think people don't know, 25-year-old nose tackle who's pretty darn good. So I can see the pieces with the Rams and that offensive line and Kyron Williams, and I'm not a big Blake Corum guy, but fine, Blake Corum, he can run hard if nothing else behind a good offensive line. And Puka Nacua. And I'm like, that team is clearly on the rise. They have already proven themselves to have a coach who can adapt, not only have a scheme that he runs every year, but then start to change his scheme. Their run game is massively different than it was just a few years ago. And so if you ask me, what do the Seahawks need to do to take the next step beyond the Rams to kind of jump the Rams this year? The very first thing comes back to Mike Macdonald. He has to establish himself as a head coach of being on par or, really close to the level of the Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay class of coaches. More than individual players, I think if Mike Macdonald can come in and raise the level of the Seahawks defense significantly, and he can start to go toe-to-toe with those offensive masterminds and actually trade some punches instead of just taking them, I think that is the number one thing that would start to shift the power balance in the division. Beyond that, a lot of it has to do with just how, I think Danny's right. How good can this defense be? When I did the show the other day about what the current starters are for the Seahawks on offense and defense, there was a lot more red on offense than there was on defense. And the red that was on defense was for players that are not expected to actually be utilized. It was guys like John Radigan and Patrick O'Connell. If Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker, if those guys work out, Mina Kimes yesterday, she's like, I'm really concerned. She made a very good point, and this is an increasing point that's being made around the NFL, that if you look at the best defenses and the best teams in the NFL, they have outstanding off-ball linebackers. You look in Kansas City, you look in San Francisco, you look in Baltimore. You've got outstanding off-ball linebacker play, which is really fascinating on a number of levels, considering that it's also one of the least valued positions from a contract perspective, and it's been declining. Well, Mina's other point was that you need those great off-ball linebackers to combat some of the offenses, the great offenses in the NFL. And Mina's feeling was that the Seahawks are just in a really bad way at off-ball linebacker. I think she was a little more bearish on Dodson and Baker than I am. Maybe a lot more bearish. I think they can be good, maybe very good linebackers for Seattle. But I think that their level of play is going to be a pretty big deal. And I think getting back to it, there is talent on this defense. And I have to admit, every time I've been listening to so many different shows all off season, and the amount of people are like, man, there's a lot of talent on that Seahawks defense. And I'm always kind of like, really? Like, I don't know that there was a lot of talent on that defense. And then I look at it, it's like, you know what? There is, though. And now there's even more when you throw in Byron Murphy and you throw in second year of Devin Witherspoon, and you throw in a healthy Uchenna Nwosu. And so there is some reason to think that the sum was less than the parts on defense last year for the Seahawks, which Danny kind of referenced, and it was part of why it's kind of inexcusable for a defensive head coach to have that be the case. And then if they can switch that around, I don't mean just for the sum to be equal to the parts. That would be an improvement. But if they can literally flip that, if Mike Macdonald can actually make this defense perform better than its talent level, which is good, then we're talking about somewhere around a top 10 defense. That would be if Mike Macdonald's able to get more out of these players than their total talent would make you think they're possible of achieving. Then all of a sudden you've got a very young, very controllable from a contract perspective defense by one of the best coaches, maybe the best defensive coach in the NFL. And if they're able to start trading blows with the more effective offenses in the NFC West in particular, I think that's a huge piece. And then the last thing, I'm going to keep hammering on this one. The last thing that I really think needs to happen for the Seahawks to reestablish themselves as relevant in this division and in the NFC and in the league in general is to become an effective, consistent, and dare I say it, feared team on the ground. This running game needs to be something that people talk about, that becomes almost something where I would love to hear a storyline where like people are like, oh, Geno's better this year because his running game's so good. He's not that good. It's just his running game. You know what? I'll be annoyed when that happens, but I'll kind of welcome it, because if we're to the point where people are saying the running game for the Seahawks is so good that it's lifting up the other parts of the team and it's masking their deficiencies, then we're in a pretty good spot, because the run game has been nowhere close to that for years. You can blame the offensive line. You can blame the running backs. You can blame the offensive coordinator. That's mainly where I've put my lot. But I see the running game as just an absolute must for this team. I think it's a must because, one, it is going to have implications for your quarterback and let him be much better, much more efficient, much more deadly. It is going to have implications for your offensive line so that they are not constantly in pass protection, that they are not constantly dropping into 3rd and 8 pass protection against exotic blitzes. It is going to have implications for the defense because they will not be on the field constantly. And it will have implications on things like 3rd down, which the Seahawks were awful at last year. And the red zone, which, by the way, they were one of, if not the worst, I did a show on this, red zone running teams in the NFL. But even all of that aside, Pete Carroll will tell you, and I've always agreed with Pete on this, and I will say forever, that his distancing of himself from this philosophy is part of his downfall, unfortunately, but that the run game makes a team tough. The run game makes a team feel fierce. And that is something you can't quite tangibly account for. But if you've seen the sideline of a football team and you've seen how they react to a running back trucking a defensive player, you see the reactions to a running back shaking a player in the open field. And you've got two guys in Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet. I think both of them, but I'd say especially Kenneth Walker. Everyone's drooling about Breece Hall. I think Kenneth Walker is every bit as talented. And if given the opportunity and he makes some growth in how he plays the game, he can be the guy. Like, he can be a constant on every fantasy team's like great value list and just huge breakout player. So I just think that would help transform this team. If you don't do that and you look at San Francisco and you look at the Rams, they are now tough, gritty running teams. You might not believe that with the Rams, but it's true. Kyren Williams was a physical between the tackles runner for them last year. They have maybe the biggest, thickest interior offensive line in the NFL. They are going to try to bruise and batter you, and then they're going to have all the Sean McVay passing, all of the Matt Stafford passing, all the Puka Nacua as a change of pace from what they can do on the ground. So it's already happening elsewhere. If it doesn't happen here, I lose a lot of confidence in the Seahawks' ability to really jump the line in their own division. Even the Cardinals, James Conner, they're mediocre to bad offensive line, but they were physical and they were one of the best red zone rushing teams in the NFL last year. Part of that's Kyler Murray, but a lot of that was James Conner and that offensive line. So I think that's going to be a real story as things evolve, and something that we're really not going to be able to know much about until we get into preseason, until we get into regular season. We're just going to have to see. All right. Let me take a look here and see if there's other things. Oh, one other thing. I was debating about whether to do this now or later. Let's do it now. I'm gonna play for you guys. I started a new show this morning, and we'll see how this goes. I don't know if I'm gonna commit to doing it every day, but I'm thinking about it. There's a lot of you that want a very short show. There's a lot of you that like the longer form shows. And so I thought might be a nice thing to do is a Seahawks 7 is the way I'm naming the show for now. All your Seahawks news every day in 7 minutes or less. And I'm going to have that out, try to have that out every day. I don't know if it's going to be every morning. I think I will try to do it every morning, but we'll see. But try to have some short form content that's just the quick hitters. And then Hawk Blogger Mornings will continue to be the more longer form content in most cases, where we'll have interviews, where we'll do a little bit deeper dive. And so in today's Seahawks 7, one of the things I talked about is the Connor Williams news. And I think this is a pretty big deal. I said it on Twitter yesterday. I've mentioned it in the end of the Mina Kimes show, but Connor Williams is a very good player. And I wanted to play some sound. I teased this before. I want to play some sound from Omar Kelly and another Miami beat writer about talking about Connor Williams, and they're going to talk about the switch to Aaron Brewer. So let me know if you guys can hear this. I'm going to turn it up as much as I can, and I'm going to put it next to the mic. I'm going to play it off my phone. So not maybe the coolest way to have sound play, but listen to them talking about Connor Williams.
Position Aaron Brewer for Connor Williams. And I know that there's been reports that Connor Williams is not retiring and is looking for work and is going to be ready for the start of the regular season. Do I believe any of that? Absolutely not. But where do you sit with the Connor Williams departure and Aaron Brewer, who signed for 3 years, $21 million, $13.2 million of it guaranteed?
It's kind of another one that's pretty obvious that it's a downgrade. Connor Williams was playing some really, really good ball when he was on the field last year. And can we say maybe even a top 5 center in the league last year when he was on the field?
I think top 10 offensive lineman in the NFL last year when he was healthy.
Whoa, regardless of position, whoa.
Yeah, he was a listen. I have respect for him the way that he was playing. You put up any one of those Raheem Mostert or Devon Achane highlights, and you're gonna see Connor Williams about 10 yards downfield mowing somebody down on some of the good highlights.
This episode is brought.
So when I heard, I'd listened to that and doing my Dolphins prep. When I heard that, and then I saw what had come of the news with the Seahawks bringing him in for a visit today, I was like, that's pretty fascinating. And I think there's some people that are like, okay, well, is that a statement about Olu Oluwatimi? Because, by the way, Drew Rosenhaus is his agent. Drew Rosenhaus has made clear he wants to play center. He's played guard and center. He wants to play center. But basically, you're talking about a guy that is one of, if not the best centers in football when he's healthy. Now, he is injured a lot, so take that for what it's worth. But there's some, you heard in that clip, Omar Kelly said he had heard rumors that he might be ready for the start of the regular season. He doesn't believe it. Well, we'll see. Even if he's not ready for the start of the regular season, the general belief is he'll be ready by the middle of the year. Or maybe it'll be 4 to 6 games. You put him on IR, you take him off when he's ready. If you could have Creed Humphrey for 10 games this year, for 8 games this year, would you take it? Would you have any question about, oh, well, you're blocking Olu Oluwatimi? Of course not. This is a 27-year-old all-pro level center. So from my perspective, I don't think there's any question that if there's a 20% chance that Connor Williams can come back this season and play to his level, you sign that guy. To review some of his numbers from last year, he ranked number 2 in the NFL in PFF grades among centers. He had an 86.5 grade, only behind Frank Ragnow of Detroit. He had a 90.5 run block grade. What did we just talk about, folks? How important is the run game for the identity of this team, for its ability to be back in contention for being a legitimate relevant team in this division? He's one of the best run blockers in football. And you heard there from Omar Kelly as well. This is a guy that is a key part of a lot of the big runs that the Dolphins had last year. You telling me you can't close your eyes and envision Ken Walker around the edge with Connor Williams clearing the way? I mean, this is a very potentially big deal. Now, hopefully it all works out. It may end up being absolutely nothing. I really hope it's not, because this is one of those things that could actually be a very big deal that comes out of nowhere. And if you're curious, from a pass blocking perspective, he wasn't as high there. He was 7th among starting centers. He had a 71.7 grade, which is still very good. But, you know, he's a big dude. 6'5", 320-pound center. I mean, Olu Oluwatimi is 6'3" and about 310, 315 maybe. So different types of players, different types of athletic profiles. And this is one that you should all be crossing your fingers and your toes for. that works out. We'll see. We will see. We got a comment here from Plenipote, one of our members. Really appreciate all the YouTube members out there saying Drew Rosenhaus is saying he'll be ready for training camp. Well, it's training camp. So he's here the day before training camp. Let's see if that's true. Peter Jacobson, another YouTube member, says, break it down, Brian. Why would the Dolphins downgrade at center if they didn't need to? It seems they could have kept him. Well, keep in mind, Peter, by the way, thanks for being a YouTube member. There was expectation that he was going to medically retire. It was serious enough of the injury. It happened in December. It was an ACL injury, which is not usually that serious, but this was considered to be a pretty serious one. And so they just had to move on. They had to secure their option at center. It also sounds like there was not any love lost there. I don't know why that might have been. The Dolphins did ask him to play some guard. Perhaps he really did want to play center and didn't appreciate that they were asking him to do some different things. Maybe, I mean, he played through some injuries. Maybe he felt like he was mishandled. I don't know, but it just didn't seem like coming back to the Dolphins was a real possibility. The Cowboys, on the other hand, there was some rumors that they might be interested, but they've got financial limitations, and so they might have been limited on that front. I think for the Seahawks to sign him, they would have to make some moves potentially. Let's take a quick look at where the Seahawks are from a salary cap perspective. They do have $8.5 million in cap space, so there's some of that they need for injury and practice squad and things like that. But I mean, they conceivably could do it. As far as players that if they wanted to move on from to save some money, Darrell Taylor's the number one at $3 million. John Radigan, by the way, $3 million cap savings if he doesn't make the team. So keep that in mind as the competition heats up. Nick Harris, by the way, who is currently the backup center, you would save $1.4 million against the cap if you cut him. So I don't know that that's a 1-to-1, but you probably would consider doing that if you needed to clear some space. So there's a few moves the Seahawks could make to clear up a little bit of room if they need to clear up more. But yeah, that's I think part of why he was not in Miami. I got a question from Kane Muss, who is also a Patreon member, I think, and also a YouTube member. Asked if the Hawkfest meetup is going to go on. And so this is something I kind of floated out there for our Patreon members and our YouTube members about whether we wanted to do an in real life IRL meetup at Hawkfest. So there's a few complications that I can't quite get into yet. I'll be able to share more in the next couple of days. I will not be able to attend in the stands with everybody. So the question for my patron and YouTube members are whether or not they would want me to organize without attending a meetup at the Hawkfest. This is the game at Lumen Field, the scrimmage at Lumen Field coming up in a few weeks. If you're interested in me trying to figure that out, drop me a line. If you're a patron member, you can get me through the Slack channel. If you're a YouTube member, you can get me through the community tab. And you can also always send me a note at brian@hawkblogger.com as well. If there's enough interest, I'd say if there's probably maybe 7 or more people that are interested, then I can work it out with the Seahawks to see if I can get something set up for all of you to go to the Hawkfest. So let me know, and I'll see about whether we can coordinate something. But there's some good news. I'd love to share, but I can't share quite yet. Hopefully I'll be able to share with you a little bit more in a couple days, but I won't be able to be there in the stands with y'all. So appreciate the question. If you haven't already given the show a like, why not? Come on, folks, give the show a like, click subscribe, help the community grow, and show some appreciation for all the Seahawks content that we're churning out. I will be back on tomorrow. don't know what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I mean, it's going to be the first day of camp. I am going to be buzzing, getting ready to head over to the VMAC and watch these guys in person, eyes on for the first time. Cannot wait. And then I'll definitely have post-camp content. I will probably go live on the way back from camp. You will want to be subscribed, click the bell to get notified, because I'm going to be going on at various times. So great time to subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get notified for when we go live. Thanks again to Danny Kelly, one of the best out there. Love Danny. Great to have him on the show. A lot of good stuff from him today. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, everybody. I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been episode 121 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care.